My name is Andrea Bates. I am one of the project managers with the Quality Improvement Department here at IPRO, and this is our Depression and Patient and Family Engagement Best Practice webinar. Next slide, please. So just a few reminders, and if you've been on any of our webinars, I'm sure you know, please mute your lines. We will have the chat open, so also feel free to put any questions or comments you may have in the chat. We'll be talking about best practices and interventions within the depression and patient family engagement projects. And we have two great guest speakers that will be talking on each of these subjects. Next slide, please. So again, just the reminders to try to be present and engaged. Mute your line when you're not speaking to avoid any background noise. Using the chat, and make sure you reply using all participants so we can all see it. And all meeting materials will be available on the program website and our iPro Learn. Next slide, please. All right, starting us off, I will be talking about the depression quality improvement activity along with its CMS goal and interventions. Next slide. So just a little reminder of the quick goals. There are 3 specific measures that the network is looking for within this project. So the first one is seeing an increase in patients actually being screened accurately. Being screened for depression. That's a 15% increase within our network service area. Also, a 10% increase in the number of patients who screen positive for depression receiving some sort of mental health treatment. And we also want to make sure a minimum of 80% of facilities are accurately reporting in EQRS the depression screenings as well. Next slide, please. So before I get into our guest speaker, one of the things I want to talk about is stigma. And because that is, when we did a root cause analysis, that was pretty much the largest response as a barrier to patients who want to seek mental health treatment. Stigma, as you can see in the middle of that kind of graph, is kind of a reason as to why other things may go wrong within patients or barriers to them not taking treatment. So there could be outside influences. They can also lead them to not seek any type of treatment or help or even ask for help. So for example, if you follow a certain religion or have certain cultural and value beliefs, in some of those sectors, there's a big stigma put on people who want to seek help for mental health. They're seen as either being not good enough or they're seen as being weak, and that could keep people from wanting to seek treatment. Furthermore, if you have a family that maybe isn't as supportive for you to get help, or you feel that if you get help, that there will be the stigma placed upon you from your family. And the other 3, lack of self-awareness. Patients may not follow through because of the fear of stigma, or they may have just a general mistrust in the healthcare system. If you think about how many of your patients may have other outstanding health issues, and they'll go to say any doctor, and the doctor may kind of downplay what's going on with them, or may not take it as seriously, or may place that stigma on them, that will keep the patient from not wanting to seek out treatment. Next slide, please. So in order to address stigma, since it was such a high response, and you'll see how it ties to our best practices speaker that we have, we released recently two different resources. The first one is the Stop the Stigma Surrounding Depression. And it's more of kind of just a general resource talking about what stigma is, the three different types of stigma, which I don't know if people are aware there are three different types: public, self, and institutional, and kind of the effects that stigma has on a person. And then we also made a frequently asked questions handout about how to flip the facility culture, whether it be the way that you address stigma with patients or using certain words and terminology, but creating a culture with empathy where patients are comfortable addressing their needs and concerns with stigma. I have put the QR codes on this PowerPoint as well, so you could hold your phone up if you wanted to and download and look at the resource right now. But again, when you get these resources later on, you can do that as well. So it's really quick and easy. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. So that leads us to our guest speaker. So today we have Ms. Stephanie Lambert. She's a master's prepared social worker with Fresenius Kidney Care. She's also the manager of social work services in the Eastern North Carolina area. She works with a quality nurse and dietitian to help drive quality measures in facilities. And she covers 13 facilities in that area, as well as oversees 12 master's prepared social workers. So thank you, Stephanie, for joining us. I think you can unmute yourself. And then, yeah, are you there, Stephanie?
I am. Thank you so much.
All right. Next slide. Take it away.
All right. So thank you so much, Andrea, for that warm introduction. I just want to say that, first of all, I am so excited to be able to be here with you guys today and to be able to share some best practices that I've found to be helpful in addressing depression symptoms among ESRD patients. I have 10 years of end-stage renal disease social work experience. I spent 8 years in direct patient care. And like Andrea just said, I have 2 years leading an amazing group of facility social workers as they attempt to do some of these things that we'll talk about today. So my hope for you today is that you will leave this presentation feeling empowered to go out and to make some changes within your own clinic culture and to be able to do some of these activities as well to improve behavioral health. I'm extremely passionate about behavioral health in dialysis, and I think that after this presentation that that will be reflected, okay? So the first thing I want to say about behavioral health in dialysis is that first we have to absolutely cultivate our clinic culture, right? So as with any clinic culture or any cultural change, that change must always start at the top. So leadership should take an active role in establishing a clinic culture that thrives on respecting our patients that have mental illness. So if we have any social workers on this call, we are the professionals in behavioral health. So that makes us leaders in our profession. So it doesn't matter whether we're in a managerial position or not. That just means that we absolutely have a responsibility to lead by example, okay? So that is not negotiable. We have to lead by example. And when we solicit help from our leadership teams, the clinic managers, facility administrators, our charge nurses, operations departments, anyone in those leadership positions. And that's what I absolutely adore about the interdisciplinary team approach. It truly does take a village to care for our patients. So the first thing we want to do is we want to check our biases, right? So how many of you, without speaking out loud, you can just answer this question on your own. have had a patient before who was just kind of difficult, or you just had a hard time empathizing with that patient. Like, we have to do that sometimes as professionals. We have to check our own biases because we're humans, we're not robots. So we have to ask ourselves, do I struggle with certain aspects of mental illness? And if that is true, if that's the case, how committed am I at educating myself about those gaps and my ability to meet the patient where he or she is? So you want to ask yourself, what strengths do I have and what are my weaknesses? And how committed am I to do better? Because we drive that behavioral health in the nephrology realm, and our peers, our coworkers, our leadership teams, they look to us. They look to us to set that example and to cultivate this new culture that we have to be prepared to practice exactly what we preach, right? All right, so the second thing, we have to choose what we're willing to accept. And this is for anybody. This is not directed to social workers. It's anybody in our clinic teams. We have to decide what it is that we're going to accept. We have to hold ourselves and we have to hold our team accountable and have open conversations about what is acceptable and what is not. For example, a coworker refers to a patient who has schizophrenia as, quote, crazy, unquote. How many of us have heard that before? We have to decide that is not acceptable language, and we have to respectfully, professionally help our teammates identify more appropriate language that is acceptable. I know I don't have to tell you that a lot of times what we feel about a person on the inside is almost always reflected on the outside, whether we mean for it to be or not. That's just the way it is, right? Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we want to reel in your clinic leadership. We want to reel in our nurses. We want to reel in the clinic managers, the medical directors, nephrologists, facility administrators. And we want to gain their support to help us drive this cultural change. Again, it always starts at the top. Prepare them to do the work to check their biases, to choose that standard of positive dialogue with the teammates, even when that dialogue seems uncomfortable. It's hard to have some conversations such as this, but we have to hold each other accountable. Okay. Y'all forgive me. I'm navigating between several screens, so just bear with me. All right. The next thing we do is we educate staff on what mental illness looks like. So it's not always surface level. Sometimes patients act out, they behave angrily, they have outbursts. And this isn't the time for us to become argumentative with the patient. This is a really good opportunity for us to invest in that patient through listening actively to understand the patient rather than listening to respond. How many times do we get caught up in our emotions and we're listening only so we can respond? But we have to stop and decide, okay, I'm going to really listen to this patient to try to understand what's going on. Another is poor energy. That's a symptom that we can look for. And what about this one? What about missing dialysis treatments? I think let's see, I think we skipped the slide. No, there we go, right there. Sorry. Missing dialysis treatment. So remember, I mentioned surface level symptoms. Well, this is a very good example of how on the surface, the patient may miss treatment because he's tired or he's feeling unwell, when really, if we dig a little deeper, sometimes a lot deeper, there could be some depression that hinders his motivation to attend treatment. And then, of course, patients are sad. That's a classic symptom. And then sometimes patients have trouble concentrating, they have trouble remembering to do things. These are symptoms to look out for as well. That patient who often forgets to take his binders, or that patient who has trouble managing his fluid. What about that patient whose albumin is dropping, but this patient has plenty of access to food, plenty of support, family, friends, financially stable? These are all things you can do to encourage your team to look out for. And of course, they're not the only symptoms. You have suicidal thoughts, that language about suicide, the loss of hope, and so many more symptoms. Now, having said that, I want to say, I'm not saying that every patient who misses a treatment or every patient who becomes teary-eyed during treatment is depressed. Please don't misinterpret that. But these things combined should raise our radar and make us take a second look to see what's going on. All right, next slide, please. Okay. So after we've done the work on ourselves, okay, we've solicited help from leadership, we've taught and trained coworkers how mental illness looks. Next, we have to adopt and cultivate the appropriate professional responses. So we want to have discussions about mental illness, right? So we want the patients to know that it's common. It's very common for dialysis patients to suffer from depression. The floor staff are often the most influential because patients gravitate toward them. They spend so much time together. So they're so influential. So a way we can do this is through short, frequent huddles. It's not been that long ago. I had my team doing weekly huddles with the staff, and they talked a lot about empathy and compassion, just professionalism in general, and how that looks from a behavioral health standpoint. So frequent huddles that can last anywhere from 2 to 3 minutes. It's a great time to engage the staff in education about mental illness. Also, lunch and learns go a really long way. It allows for open communication and feedback in a more intimate setting. Another opportunity is during staff meetings. You can have those kinds of discussions. And then the next thing is talking about empathy, right? We cannot talk about mental illness and behavioral health without talking about empathy. Empathy and caring for patients with mental illness, it goes hand in hand. And so does compassion. So with Fresenius, we have these bite-sized trainings that are dedicated to teaching the staff about what concepts are integral with empathy and compassion. So if you have those, I encourage you to utilize them. Now, if you don't work for Fresenius and you have other tools that you can utilize, I encourage you to do that. I encourage you to spend a lot of time with your co-workers in facilitating these types of trainings because they are beneficial. Now, if you don't have access to any kind of trainings like this, I would encourage you to get creative. It is super easy to do it on your own, and the staff really respond well to it from my experience. They respond well, it builds morale. And of course, what patient doesn't love an atmosphere where the morale is strong, right? So if you have any questions or you need some inspiration, Andrea can let me know, and I can kind of call you guys up, or you can call me and we can chit chat if you need some more guidance on that. And of course, normalizing language about mental illness, it goes hand in hand with open discussions. And then of course, if we're going to check our own judgments, we want to encourage our teammates to check theirs as well. And we want to help them be able to do that. You know, I talk a lot about looking beneath the surface, and I'm kind of weird in that I love digging for things. I love looking beneath the surface. It teaches it's a skill that comes acquired. So I would say teach your teams that what we see is not always face value. Oftentimes, patients will present as feeling sick or tired. Even sometimes they may say transportation, when sometimes underneath that surface, it crosses over into the realm of depression. Even sometimes patients come to dialysis really upbeat, but that's just the surface level. Sometimes there are other things beneath, and we have to learn that what we see is not always what it seems. All right. Okay. Reminder that words matter. You know, there's a saying that says sticks and stones may break your bones, but words will never hurt. And of course, I know where the author was going with that quote, right? But words don't hurt physically, no, but they do hurt. In fact, many of us may be able to recall a time when someone said something to us, whether it was kind or unkind, that impacted who we are, maybe even shaped who we are or who we became, who we were, or who we became. So words really do matter. They matter so much. So we want to always be careful. We want to drive that home in our clinics. Be careful that what we say to each other when we think patients aren't listening. Too often I've heard comments like, she's just crazy, or there's the other word, a junkie. I've even heard the word crackhead. I feel like I'm saying something bad when, I'm saying a bad word whenever I say that word crackhead. I'm uncomfortable even saying it. So we want to teach our teams to utilize appropriate language. Again, leadership is going to have to be prepared to hold each other accountable when we miss that mark. The new culture that we're trying to adopt here, it has no room for this style of language. Instead, we use terms such as people with mental illness or person with substance use disorder. Okay. Last, but again, not least, appropriate self-disclosure. Again, this particular tactic, it requires skill. And if you can use this without crossing ethical boundaries, it's very, very helpful in establishing a trusting relationship. So for example, Mr. Smith, I've had to go to counseling before. I had some things I needed to get off my chest to someone who didn't know me, and you know what? It worked. So that statement is very vague, right? You want to avoid statements that give too many details, such as, I went to marriage counseling with my husband. He had an affair. I was so lost and felt so empty. Our counselor helped me learn to trust him again. I'm sure I don't have to tell any of you that this is way too much information. We don't want to ever disclose this much information to our patients. So this style of self-disclosure, it damages the trusting relationship that we have. It crosses that professional boundary, and it also takes the focus away from that patient and what that patient is dealing with and places it back on ourselves. So if you have trouble utilizing appropriate self-disclosure, the safest avenue is to avoid it, but I would still challenge you to practice it with a trusted friend or coworker just to hone in on that skill, and maybe you can utilize that in the future. Next slide. Okay. So Andrea and I talked a lot about wellness assessments, and she asked me to share this with y'all. So one of the best tools that we utilize in our clinics is the wellness assessment. It begins with the PHQ-2, which is this 2-question survey that helps us understand the frequency of the patient's mood. If the patient scores 3 or higher, we move to the PHQ-9, which is a more detailed depression screener. The wellness assessment then asks a series of anxiety questions, better known as what we know, the GAD-7, right? Everybody's probably heard of the GAD-7 with anxiety questions. And then it's followed by stress and wellness visioning assessment. And you can see screenshots of this on the next slide. Wait, here it is right here. So this is it. I'm sorry. You can go back. I apologize. Okay, so this is a screenshot of the PHQ-2 and the PHQ-9. Okay. And let's see, can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, here we go. The second part of this assessment, it ends with open questions. They're open-ended questions about stress. And then there's a miracle style question. And I'm not sure if you can read it. Are you bothered by any areas of stress like financial, health, or relationship? The patient says yes, no, or declines. And you simply describe, the patient describes what that stress looks like, and we enter that in the patient's own words. And then of course you got the wellness visioning. If you didn't need dialysis in your life, could be exactly the way you would want. What would it look like? And what do you miss most about your life before starting dialysis? So I love this style of questions because it gets to the heart of the matter. It's a form of motivational interviewing that helps us figure out what drives the patient to make changes. And motivational interviewing is my favorite therapeutic technique because it really does give all of the control back to the patient. And the stress question allows the patient to spell out exactly what is creating stress or anxiety for him or her. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so after using the wellness assessment, the social worker should be able to work with the patient to identify a plan for helping the patient to improve their mood. And then an added bonus is that when the patient feels better psychosocially, their quality of life also improves. That the results of the wellness assessment, it should be shared with the IDT. So together, the IDT can treat the whole patient. We know that patients have better health outcomes when we take a team approach to every aspect of their care. So the wellness assessment, it is triggered if a patient's considered high acuity 3 times in 3 months, right? So once this is done, the social worker determine next.
Stephanie, did we lose you?
Working together.
There you are. Okay.
I'm
So go ahead.
sorry. Okay. Did you guys miss anything? Okay.
Yeah, you cut out for just a second. So if you want to back up just a couple sentences.
Okay. So the patient's acuity score, it ranges from high, elevated, moderate, and low acuity. Okay. So high patients are going to receive weekly MSW engagement. Those patients who are elevated acuity, they receive bi-monthly MSW engagement. Moderate and low patients receive monthly MSW engagement. And then the goal here is to improve those high and elevated patients to lower acuity levels. And how we do that is through an IDT approach. So the social worker should be having conversations with the IDT throughout. So the IDT can also help engage patients. And then the patient learns these cognitive skills that are the way the patient views their life on dialysis. Okay, next slide. Next slide. Okay, thank you. All right. Sorry, y'all, just a sec. So I want you just to take a second and just consider what your coping skill is. So when I'm stressed, I feel like I'm spiraling. If I feel like I'm spiraling out of control, I might read. I may call up a friend, or I may talk with my husband. I may even pray. It just depends on what the situation is at that time. My coping skill changes. So I do all of these things to make myself feel better. When I'm talking to patients about mental illness, I compare outpatient therapy to a form of self-care. For some patients, or even some of you, self-care may look like getting your hair or nails done. For others, it may be going to play golf or going fishing. When I get to know my patients and learn that Mr. Smith utilizes fishing as his method to decompress, I help him identify why fishing calms him. And I teach him how outpatient therapy can have the same benefit. And it actually works. Patients who can view outpatient therapy in the same light as self-care, they tend to be more likely to engage in outpatient therapy. We also approach mental health with the same level of respect and care as physical health. Just like we have to eat the right foods, limit our fluid and sodium intake, we have to feed our minds, right? We have to feed our minds with positivity. We can't feed our bodies soda and chips all day and expect to maintain healthy labs. It's no different with our psyche. We have to exercise our brains to think more positively and to then make realistic changes to bring about happy thoughts and happy feelings. And so I utilize this a lot, and then I have my team go back and utilize it as well. Next slide. All right, so these are some resources and interventions that we utilize a lot. Unfortunately, I'm not allowed to share the PDF files. I wish I could, but these are some screenshots of some common tools that we use to work with patients suffering from mental illness. We teach patients the difference between depression versus sadness. Sometimes they get connected, right? So patients don't always know the difference. We teach them various coping skills like for managing that depression. It's especially important for patients who have those limited coping skills, or for those patients who practice unhealthy coping skills like maybe drinking or like outbursts. And then we teach patients about cognitive behavioral approaches. I think sometimes we forget about this, but we help them connect the dots of why they feel the way they do. Again, feeding the brain negativity, right? If I think life is not worth living because I'm on dialysis and I shouldn't attend treatment today because I'm not going to live long life anyway, then sadness becomes my emotion. And behaviorally, I may miss treatment. I may come to treatment, but then I might sign off. I may have anger outbursts. Every patient's response is not going to be the same. That's why it's good to teach our teams about mental illness and how it may present. Like, because you can have a patient suffering from depression, but on paper, they're doing everything right, like managing their fluids, smiling, attending treatments. Now, take a patient who is sad, but they're not quite depressed. The cognitive behavioral model, the process may look something like this. I don't want to go to dialysis today because I'm just tired. I feel like it's all I do sometimes. I feel down today, but you know what? I'm going to push through and go to treatment anyway because it may make me feel better. So look at the different responses. This patient, although down, chose a healthier approach. Remember, the cognitive behavioral model, it's not about unrealistically ignoring the fact that this patient is on dialysis. That's a given, right? CBT helps the patient take a look at their life through a more positive lens. So I just want to make sure I drive home the fact, don't mistake this to mean that patients don't have the right to make their own decisions regarding treatment. They absolutely do. So please don't take that away from this presentation. This simply means that when patients are equipped with the right behavioral tools, the likelihood of them making the best lifestyle decisions for themselves is oftentimes more favorable. So I think that concludes my presentation. Any questions or comments?
Thank you so much, Stephanie. We did have a couple questions. So we do have two people who their hand raised, and then we have one in the chat. But the people who have their hand raised, let me see. One of them is Sandra Rubio. I just sent you a request to unmute yourself on your own. Do you have a question you'd like to ask? And the other one is Maritza Barber. Your hand was raised, unless it was raised by accident. So I also sent a request for you to unmute. But there was a question in the chat, Stephanie, that said, is the wellness assessment available? Like, what's it called? Or is that something that FKC, that's part of their kind of internal processes?
It's an internal process through FKC.
Okay.
The thing about the wellness assessment is we already utilize the PHQ-2. We utilize PHQ-9 across the board, right? And the two remaining questions, you can utilize that in your everyday practice. So don't feel like, oh, I have to have this format or I have to have this specific form. So those questions, the stress-related questions, the miracle style questions, we can utilize that without the wellness assessment. In fact, this is part of our therapeutic process.
Wonderful. Sandra, I see that you've unmuted. Do you still have a question? Or you could always put it in the chat. I don't see any other questions coming up in the chat. I've been following along. Stephanie, thank you so much for presenting on the call and kind of what you do as a social work manager. And I think in your region, you have some wonderful best practices. If we have no more questions, I'm going to move it along to our next portion, the patient and family. Oh, yes.
Hi, Andrea. It's Vicky from
Hi.
the network. Thank you. That was an excellent presentation, Stephanie. Really, I loved everything you said. I was just curious, how do your staff perceive some of this education that you provide, like talking about a person and changing our language? Has it made a really big difference in your facilities? People really mindful and watch each other's backs with that kind of stuff? And do you have to do it a lot too? That was my other question. Is it because of staff turnover, or is it something that it's like a culture that you've developed?
So I worked in a clinic for 8 years, and it's kind of something I initiated in my own clinic. So as I am leading my team now is something that we're gradually doing in their clinics as well. So I will say there are pockets of clinics who are more receptive, and it's, kind of they're grabbing that really quickly, whereas other clinics, it's a gradual process. But my team, my social work team, I have an amazing group of social workers, and I think they all embrace the same values that I embrace. I'm very passionate about what we do in the clinics, and I think they are as well. And so they are always very open and receptive, and they're always excited to go to the treatment floor and have huddles with their teams and talk about behavioral health. Absolutely.
Amazing. I love to hear that. And I love to hear the training that goes into the chair staff that you guys provide, because I think you're right. You're so right about the effect that that has, because there's so much in contact with the patients. And I've got to
Absolutely.
imagine one other question. Do you notice that the more you can kind of get the staff to buy in and participate, with this kind of communication and watching, what they're doing, and realizing all this, have you noticed a change in maybe the amount of grievances and the actual like overall feeling in the unit, like people more happy and satisfied just because of these kind of communication and mindful reminders that you do?
Oh, yes, absolutely. It is grievance are hugely impacted. And I just think that comes from a positive atmosphere. Whenever you have staff who are on the same page, and everyone is speaking that same language. I do a lot of speaking about asset-based language versus deficit-based language. And so we're pushing that out there too as well. And I think that anytime you have staff and an IDT approach. I'm a huge advocate for IDT. I think everyone that knows me knows I really push the team approach. And I think when patients see that and they feel that, it helps resolve grievances faster. And it doesn't always reach the corporate level, because we can usually kind of squash that at the clinic level.
That is, I mean, everything you're saying is just music to my ears, and I really appreciate all your advice and the great work you're doing. Thank you so much
Thank you so
um,
much.
for sharing this with us. I think there's another question
Appreciate it.
here.
Yes. Do we have time, Vicky, for another question? We're good? You think?
I would think so. We've got
Sure.
till 3:30, so maybe just one more
Okay.
question. Then
Just
we'll-
one more question. So this one is, how do we tell if a patient is having a medical crisis versus having a behavioral crisis? And how do we as social workers make care plans to address them? Do you have any kind of tips or tricks, Stephanie, or how you educate your staff as well?
So repeat that question one more time, because you were going out, and think it's tropical storm here. So
Oh, no. Yeah, they wanted to know the difference, like between educating staff on the difference between a medical crisis versus having a behavioral crisis and doing care plans to address those. I know we've seen that in clinics where staff could, mistake a behavior incident for maybe something that's more medical or vice versa.
yeah, that's kind of a tough question I was not prepared for, but I will say that we're making it a habit for the clinic teams to, in fact, I just did an in-service with my clinics here a couple weeks ago about suicide, how it's on the rise, and what to look for with patients who are suicidal. And most of the time it's going to be that language. It's going to be withdrawal. it doesn't, I think when we're talking about medical versus psychological, there are distinct differences, and one of them is definitely the language or the lack of language, not speaking what's actually going on. Is you got a patient who's typically upbeat, yet today they're kind of withdrawn and they're speaking a language like I don't want to be here anymore, I don't want to do this anymore. I think those are the kind of things we kind of have to look out for in terms of patients who are medically unstable versus psychologically, and reaching that place of instability. But if you want to shoot me your email or put it in chat, I'll try to reach out and send you some more resources for some of the things that I've been doing in the clinic.
Yeah, so the person who asked that question, Nicole, if you want to put your email address in the chat, I'll make sure I take it down and I can get it to Stephanie.
Thank you for that question.
So we have no more questions. So I think now we can move on to the next session. Danielle?
Hi, thank you, Andrea. I'm Danielle. I'm a project manager, and we're going to talk about our peer mentoring program. Next slide. So the peer mentoring CMS goal by 2026 is to have a 25% increase in facilities supporting and developing a peer mentoring program. So that is an annual increase by 5% for each project year. Next slide. Okay. So what is peer mentoring? Peer mentoring is a relationship that benefits all parties, mentee and mentor. Peer mentoring usually occurs to help an individual that is less experienced achieve a goal, reach a higher level of understanding, or develop effective coping skills under the guidance of a more experienced individual. Peer mentoring looks to build a supportive and safe relationship between two people through the sharing of knowledge and experiences while demonstrating differences to help each other grow. Peer mentoring can help in the development of problem-solving skills, promote goal attainment, improve treatment compliance, and increase a patient's overall quality of life. Peer mentoring can be done within a one-to-one setting or a group setting. Next slide. So what is a peer mentor in ESRD? An ESRD peer mentor is a trained individual from any background or ethnicity that shares their experiences with kidney disease to help their peers feel less alone in facing the challenges of end-stage renal disease. Peer mentors can help motivate a peer to stay active in their care. So who can be a peer mentee? A peer mentee can be a person who is looking to make a connection with a peer who is thriving despite having kidney disease and wants more knowledge from someone who is also thriving with ESRD. During a peer mentoring session, there should be a mutual exchange between the mentor and mentee, even though the mentee may have less experience with ESRD. The sharing of experiences and different perspectives should help build a strong bond and promote an environment of co-learning. Next slide. The role of a peer mentor. A peer mentor should improve communication among patients, caregivers, providers, and other individuals within the ESRD community. They should provide support to patients and mentees through information sharing, listening to concerns, and sharing experiences. They should also act as a role model through the demonstration of positive behavior during difficult and complex situations. They should also offer mentees encouragement as they encounter new situations and challenges within their treatment. They can also help relieve anxiety and promote positive behavioral change, and provide support and increase confidence of new patients, especially those that have crashed into dialysis. Next slide. So who should be an ESRD peer mentor? Peer mentors can range from all different backgrounds, races, and ethnicities, and in some cases they can speak multiple languages, but they must be proficient in English. They should be individuals who generally have a positive outlook and attitude on being an active member of their healthcare team and managing their ESRD treatment plan. They should have been in any ESRD treatment modality for at least 1 year. They should have strong conversational skills and have the ability to connect and communicate with their ESRD peers. These individuals should be successful in their own ESRD treatment goals and can provide insight to help others improve their ESRD treatment management skills. Next slide. So benefits of peer mentoring. So this can increase the self-esteem and confidence among patients. It should enhance communication and understanding between staff and patients. It should improve patients' knowledge and empower patients' self-efficacy and self-esteem. It should increase patients' ability to socialize with one another and enhance their overall ESRD experience, improve facility and patients' concerns, and improve home dialysis and transplant referrals, as well as pique a patient's interest in other treatment modalities. They should also improve new patients' adjustment to the facilities and the demands of treatments. Next slide. So our recruitment process. Next slide. So peer mentors are usually recruited through our IPRO ESRD PFR Alliance. The PFR Alliance is a patient advocacy group that provides patients, transplant recipients, and care partners the opportunity to share thoughts and experiences on ESRD care, as well as develop different strategies on how to get more ESRD patients to become active within their healthcare. The PFR Alliance also seeks to promote positive relationships between patients, provider staff, ESRD stakeholders, and the network. Next slide. So we tend to work with facilities to help facilities identify patients with leadership ability. Once these patients have been identified, they become part of the IPRO ESRD Network Program Alliance. Once they're part of the Alliance, they complete our PFR Alliance orientation, which includes becoming activated within your own healthcare team, learning about different treatment modalities, learning how to engage with other patients within your facility. They also talk about different ways they can share network education, resources, and presentations. The patient, the PFR, should partake in skill development to include patient advocacy and conversational skills, and then they'll finally, once they complete all these different steps, they'll complete the peer mentoring training. Next slide. So once they become a part of our PFR Alliance, we really want to know about the patient. So we're really trying to see how much peer mentoring experience does this individual have. A lot of times when we get new PFRs, they've been peer mentors in their facility for a long time. They just haven't been on IPRO's roster. We want to know how long each member has been in their current treatment modality, or if they were in different treatment modalities previously.
They were very scattered.
I also want to know if they were certified peer mentors in another program. A lot of our patients may have done the NKF program, the NCC program, or the AAKP program. How long they've been certified, and if certified, would they be interested in taking a peer mentor refresher course? Do they have a background in patient advocacy? How well do they collaborate with their facility staff? If they are compliant with their treatment, and how much do they know and understand about ESRD? Next slide. So we try to stay very connected with our peer mentors. We have monthly messaging to patients through our newsletters, like our patient voice expert thoughts. We also do weekly text messages. We talk about the peer mentoring benefits, roles, and peer mentoring expectations. Next slide. We also have monthly meetings, and these are our PFR monthly meetings where we talk about different ESRD educations. We have community awareness. We highlight different ESRD topics. Sometimes these topics are generated by our PFRs. We also try to use some of these topics to be the foundation for the mentor-mentee interactions. And then we also assist patients with our IPRO Learn platform that we utilize where our peer mentoring program is actually located. Next slide.
Okay. Yeah. How many are there?
Records?
Okay. So in terms of peer mentoring, we do have a best practice. So the following having some of our patients put onto IPRO Learn, some of our patients struggled with some of the technology signing into IPRO Learn, getting their CCN. So a way to remedy that is we started to conduct live peer mentoring sessions. So there are two-part sessions. One Part 1 is done 1 month, and the following month, Part 2 is completed. The first month, we talk about talking effectively with other patients and then mentoring to support choices. The live peer mentoring session sought to help patients move from that recruitment phase to the training phase. We really wanted to make sure that IPRO Learn wasn't a barrier for a lot of patients. A lot of patients are interested, but they tend to get intimidated by the sign-up process or remembering passwords. But also the live session really helps to create the mentor the mentee experience where we have a lot of our long-term peer mentors share their experiences and effective strategies with our newer peer mentors. Next slide. So now I would like to open it up to one of our longtime peer mentors. Her name is Kim Pratt. She is a longtime patient subject matter expert for the IPRO ESRD network and is a strong transplant advocate. She is also a long-term PFR and has participated in numerous peer mentoring programs. Kim is currently working with ESRD NCC Affinity Group and is also an active member of Network One's Medical Review Board. So I would like to welcome Kim.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Kim. So the first question I want to ask you is, do you see the value in a peer mentoring program?
Absolutely. A fellow patient's perspective and experience alone can be comforting, and the knowledge shared is empowering. I know when I crashed into dialysis years ago. I was on dialysis 5 years before my transplant I had 3 years ago, and I was very overwhelmed. And the peer mentoring, the information that other patients can give you of their experiences is just like gold. Was like gold.
Okay. So why did you choose to become a peer mentor?
You know, I know what it's like to experience every phase of dialysis and transplant. So I knew the compassion needed for them to be successful improving the quality of their life. I know uh, I've sat in the chair. I know all the different things that can arise and how important is, you know, you'll, I can, I just see things before they already happen. I could see a patient that maybe is not understanding the importance of the infection, making sure they're new to dialysis and they have a chest catheter. You really share that information of, you know, please do not get that wet, do everything possible to prevent infections. Sometimes people think they're not, you know, that they're special. And that's not information that they're supposed to take serious. So you just help your fellow patients to, you know, be a better patient so you can improve the quality of your life, you know, obtain a transplant, hopefully, choose the best modality choice, and make them aware that there are other choices.
So our next question is, how have you collaborated with your facility or another facility to mentor your fellow ESRD peers?
I'm in contact with my old dialysis clinic social worker and the social worker of my transplant clinic. They refer patients to me. Um, they'll call me and say, I have this patient, this is their name and number, and they'd like to speak to you about this or that. And then I contact them and I go over, you know, the issues that they're concerned about. A lot of patients, they do want to hear, you know, what their doctor has to say, but not, you know, sometimes doctors don't have a lot of time to spend to go over the things that a fellow patient who's walked those same hallways, who's done all the work already. So it's a different perspective that they're looking for.
Okay.
Mhm.
So do you find peer mentoring to be an effective strategy for educating ESRD patients about different transplant treatment modalities, like especially like transplantation?
Yes. Since I'm not going inside my old dialysis center, I share the link to the network so they can view our tools. I do speak to many patients regarding all the aspects of transplantation. Um, you know, I'm going to be a guest speaker this next month at the kidney transplant support group that's going to be at Rhode Island Hospital. They just started those support group meetings in person again. It's been a very long time from COVID that they haven't had the in-person meetings, and I was invited to speak, and I'm gonna be speaking in October, and the topic is patients' perspective on dialysis, transplantation, and advocacy. And I'm also gonna, they asked me to talk about being a PFR, and I will let these other patients understand that they can also apply to be a PFR and make sure they understand what that role is, and how, important it is. So I'm going to be going over all of that in person, which I like that in person best. That's my favorite.
Okay, so then our last question is, how important of a role does education and advocacy play in improving an individual's quality of life?
Well, you're giving them the language and voice to speak on their own behalf. The education informs the patient what they need to know to prevent infections, so obtaining the path of obtaining a transplant, and them understanding the differences between the modalities that are available. And so all of that, being educated, the education part is tremendous. There's so many things that people don't know. And when the patient starts talking to each other, we all learn from each other things that we didn't know. There's so many details about the journey of being on dialysis and obtaining a transplant and after the transplant. Everyone has different experiences, and it's helpful to each other and comforting.
Well, thank you so much for participating with us today, Kim. Next
You're
slide.
welcome. Thank you.
I have a question for Kim, Danielle.
Yes.
Okay,
is
so
it time for
yeah, that's the
questions?
next
Okay.
slide. Questions. Go ahead.
Good. Hi, Kim. It's Vicky. I think
Hi.
you're a rock star.
Oh,
But I was just curious, we have a lot of facilities that tell us, that one thing they say is, oh, if you get patients involved and they're talking about things that are happening at the unit, there's going to be HIPAA violations or problems. What's your experience with that? I mean, do you feel like you really talk about patient, or as a patient, would you really go there, or how do you manage that, I guess?
you have to be very conscious about, what you talk about. And, as a PFR, you need to, not pretend that you're a doctor, you're going to give advice. You have to be very careful about, what you say. And that's part of the training. It'll tell you about explaining about HIPAA. Um, I know when I was on dialysis, there was a time just even you wondering about what happened to a patient if they're not showing up, and you just you don't know what you're allowed to ask, or there's all kinds of situations that you have to take one situation at a time and handle it professionally, really. And if you give me an instance, I'll tell you. how-
No, I think you answered really well. I like the
yeah.
fact that you acknowledge that there's training for this
Yes.
and that really you just have to be
Absolutely.
careful. We haven't experienced a situation where, patients are usually pretty thoughtful about all this because they're just trying to do the right thing for the group. So,
Mhm.
but I know it's a constant issue with facilities that are worried about it. And have you signed any kind of a disclaimer with your facility, like to say that you can share your name and your number and all that kind of
Yes.
stuff? Okay.
Yes, they sent me that, and I feel that I know absolutely the transplant clinic, the social worker sent me that, and I signed that, and I sent it back to him. And yes, I did. So
Yeah, I think that's helpful, right? Because then
yes,
things are being shared and they know that they're covered. So we've offered
yeah,
that as a solution too with facilities, to make sure that they can get it. And the other thing I was just curious about, in your work, um, I'm always very impressed with what patients see that we don't see. You know, like our eyes are blind to that, right? As a healthcare provider, you're out there delivering care and everything looks pretty good. And then somebody points something out, you're like, oh, I guess if I would have looked at it that way, I would have seen it. So, have you noticed things like that where you're able to bring things to the attention of either your clinic or someone that you're working with where maybe they didn't have that perspective?
Yes, there's just little things. Sometimes there maybe just little things that you could share. I mean, and all the time, all of the people in my dialysis clinic, can speak highly of every single one of them. Um, but it's funny. You can go along and they didn't tell you. No one said to you, "Oh, when if you haven't been urinating for so long because you're on dialysis, and then all of a sudden you have a kidney transplant." And all of a sudden your bladder is shrunk some, and immediately it's you can't control your bladder, and you get this transplant. You go to stand up, and no one told me about that. Sometimes it's these peer mentoring things like, hey, by the way, when you get that transplant, um, you're going to need to be near a bathroom for a while, till your bladder starts to stress. But it's like that didn't come up when you're speaking to the doctor. No one mentioned that. So sometimes just speaking to each other on the level of, patients understanding each other. And it's just what I call it is I sat in that chair. I know everything, like a nurse that's placed the needles in my arm for 10 years, people have been there 10 years. They know what to do, but they don't know what it feels like. They don't
Right.
know what that infiltration feels like. They don't know what the cramp feels like when they pull too much fluid. It's the experience that is just so valuable. So we're speaking the same language, I think, each patient with each other.
You gave an awesome example, Kim. I really love that. Years ago, I'm talking probably 30 years ago, we had a young patient in the dialysis clinic I was working with, and she got a transplant. We were on a strip mall next to a big mall, that everybody went shopping when those were popular.
Yeah.
And she had gone shopping at the mall, and she came walking into the dialysis facility. And the first thing she said to us, she said, "How do you guys live with those bathrooms so far apart?" She said, "I never realized when I was a
Oh yeah.
dialysis patient where the bathrooms were in the mall." She said, "But I was like having to hustle across the mall to find the bathroom." She said, "This is ridiculous." And
Oh
I never thought of it.
yeah.
I mean,
It's those things
it's
that, yeah,
simple
just
little
like
things,
that.
right?
When I started walking around where I live in an apartment complex, and I needed to, keep walking and maintain that right after the transplant. Um, I kept looping a shorter area, so around the certain buildings, but not going on the bike path. There's a bike path near my apartments also, but I would not venture out on the bike path because it would be too far out. So with going around and around the buildings was I could control if I had to run home to use the bathroom, because I had to do that in the beginning after the transplant. But that's not stuff that the doctors can have the time to go over all these little things. So sharing that, just little things like that with each other. Like make sure, when you get this done, this is what's going to happen. Then you're going to get, you know, the stent pulled out in a month, and this is what, I feel like they give you a big a big binder, when you're going to get the transplant. And there's everything to expect after you get the transplant, but there's so much to read. I don't remember that part in that big binder that said you're going to be urinating nonstop right after the transplant. No, I don't see that in there.
Yeah, I think your experience is sage, and I think that it really points out how patients help other patients transition in just the little normal things, not the heavy medical stuff, but those are important things too. So
Yes.
I see another question for Danielle. Somebody asked, Amber Jackson asked Danielle how they could get this program started at their clinic. So maybe you could review that a little bit. I think go over some of
Yeah,
those
I can go
particular
through it.
steps.
So first thing you want to make sure is that the patient is a PFR. They completed the the application, because in the application it goes through HIPAA violations and things like that. And once they do that, they'll be oriented like in our program, and we try to do the orientation every 3 to 4 months. They'll receive like a new patient packet online, and then we're starting to do the live sessions every month. So they would come to the live sessions. Each session is 1.5 hours. It's only 2 parts. The first part is 1.5 hours, and the second part, the following month, will be 1.5 hours. Once they do that, if they still feel a little bit unsure, I can then connect them with a long-term peer mentor, someone like Kim, who can kind of coach them through it, give them strategies, and then we talk to them about how they can collaborate with their social worker. And once we start getting them to collaborate with you guys about like what type of education they need to be giving, or what education the patient is looking for, that's kind of how you get the peer mentoring process going. You have to have, it's easier to have education that all patients are interested in learning about. So if everybody in your facility is interested in transplant, get their peer mentor to be trained in transplant so they can have a conversation with different individuals. And that's kind of the best way to get the ball rolling. You want to have a topic that is foundational that everyone is interested in.
There's another couple questions that are, and some of them, this is to Kim and to you, Danielle, about the amount of time. So one of the facilities asked, what's the amount of time and how can you get folks, patients to be, commit to that time, and make it with all the things they have go on reasonable. And then, the perspective of the technology and being able to do it. So I think there's some, maybe from a patient and from your perspective, Danielle, you could both talk about the time and how to recruit people, in light of that being more time they have to spend.
Okay, so in terms of the time, if they're gonna do the live sessions, it's a 3-hour commitment, but it's 3 hours over the course of 2 months. But if they want to go at their own pace, we can walk them through the IPRO Learn process, and they can do it. The time limit we tend to give them is like 6 months. After the 6 months of being in the peer mentoring program, you're not trained, that's when we'll have a conversation with you. But the program, you can do it at your own pace on IPRO Learn. You can watch it as slowly or as quickly as you like, and then you can answer the questions, but you don't have to do it right away. So it can be at the pace of the patient.
I think one of the questions is how all the time it takes for them to even accomplish it. So like to do the actual talking to other patients and such. I don't know how Kim's been able to balance
That
that.
really depends on the patient. It depends on how comfortable the patient feels being a peer mentor. Sometimes if the patient feels comfortable enough, or they've already been engaging with patients, they don't necessarily need that step. But if the patient is really new, really fresh, and they feel uncomfortable, it may take longer. You can't really put a time frame on that. It really depends on how comfortable the patient is.
And I think it depends on if the PFR is a fellow dialysis patient, and they will be seeing them in the waiting room, or in the sitting near them and being able to talk, if they're allowed to talk, and visually seeing them more. Or like me, I'm not in the dialysis clinic anymore, so I'm more relying on the phone. So I have people that want to talk on the phone. They the first time I speak to them, it's a lot of information, a lot of questions they have for me. Some of the people, they just want to hear the answer to all the questions they have, and then they not necessarily maybe need to speak to me again unless they have a question that there's steps to try to obtain a transplant. They don't understand something, and then they'll message me again. Then I have a gentleman who is he's told he needed a transplant, but he wasn't put on dialysis yet, which I think now he's going to be. But he's so overwhelmed and he's scared. I mean, he literally cried to me on the phone. I wish I could hug this man. You can't do that, but I'm on the phone. I've given him my patience. I've answered all his questions and everything he possibly. It was a lot of questions. Then I didn't hear from him for a month, and then he messaged me again, asked if he could speak to me. He said that it's getting closer to the time that this is going to have to happen where he'll start dialysis. And he's from France. He's had very strong French accent, and his sister in France was going to try to be tested and see if she could be a donor to him. I explained to him that there's hope. I told him that I feel like he had the strength and try to instill the hope in him, because he was very much overwhelmed by this happening to him. And I explained to him that it is everything there. It's going to be hard, and it will be scary, and you will see blood in the beginning of your dialysis treatment. But you will get used to this, and you're gonna find a strength within yourself that you're gonna find it. And I tried to explain. I'm not gonna say it's all rainbows, but at the same time, I did all this. I did a lot in those 5 years to obtain my transplant and find a donor. I have an altruistic donor, but so I want to be real with them and then be very positive and encouraging. And so it just depends on the patient. They just might want certain things answered, and you can answer that. But if I was a PFR still in the dialysis clinic, there would probably be different kinds of conversations and be different. Like they would probably talk to me more about, oh, I went and had this test. Now I passed this. So there might be more dialogue if I was in the clinic alongside them. So it just depends.
Right, right, absolutely. And I think, the one piece, and I know Danielle was making this point earlier, is that we at the network, as little or as much as people can do is what we're, if they can only do an hour a week, that's fine. That's all they can do, but Danielle, you might want to come off mute though. I don't know whether you're offering more of those live sessions, but there's also the question.
Yeah. I'm doing a live session every month, and if there is a higher demand, I may try to do two, depending. If I know some patients do Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, some do Monday, Wednesday, Friday, so I am open to having different days depending on the demand of the patients.
Are you doing it right now on those alliance meeting days, or you have separately?
So
How did the
I'm
staff
gonna
know?
initially we were doing it on the PFR Alliance days, but the PFRs actually wanted regular PFR meetings. They didn't want it to correspond with the peer mentoring training, so I will be conducting them separately.
Would there be a schedule somewhere, or how would
Yeah,
a
I
staff member
I
know?
can create a schedule. I just have to think of which days work best. So, and I can send out the schedule.
Or you could post it in IPRO Learn and people could
Oh
look
yeah, I
for
can
it?
put it on iPhone. That's a good idea. I can do that.
I think that would help if people wanna, so there'd be a live option and somebody could get the course and you'd help them through it and they could answer the questions and then they would be done, right? And
Yeah.
then you just have to do one or two of those. Okay. So I hope that helps with the technology. I don't see any other questions here. Oh wait, here's one more that just popped in. Oh, this is a long one. So are there different levels of PFRs that connect our patients with depending on their needs? If the PSR has not had a transplant and the patient is looking for connection for information on transplant, is there a way to ensure they get connected? So it's two
Okay.
questions,
Yeah.
different levels of PFR
Okay, so
and then the transplant.
I'm sorry if I confuse you guys. Our PFRs are from a patient facility, patient representative alliance. Those are PFRs. There are 3 levels of PFRs. We're gonna have our PFR members. Those are individuals that are they're looking for passive engagement. They just they may come to a meeting, they get the information, they'll give it to the social worker. Maybe they'll do a bulletin board. Then we have our QIA champions, which is the second level. These are the individuals who are active members. They're actively talking to patients. They're engaging with their social worker or the facility staff. They're helping to pass out resources from the QIAs. And then we have our PSMEs, and that's the highest level. Those are individuals that are participating on a national scale, doing community-wide programs and things like that. In terms of peer mentors, you can have a peer mentor in your facility. Obviously, each patient is not going to have been a participant in each treatment modality. So if there is a patient in your facility who was looking to connect with a peer mentor that has experience in transplant, then the network would be the conduit to connect them to a peer mentor that has that experience. Hopefully that answers the question.
Exactly.
Do we know if there are any more questions?
I don't see any others, no. I think that's been very, very helpful, but thank you very much. This has been excellent, and it's great to hear from a patient who's doing it and doing such a great job.
I share with all my doctors, even when I see my transplant nephrologist, I bring copies of the tools, maybe things that we've worked on. I'm also on the transplant affinity group. Anything I always I never go empty-handed. I've even brought this information to my primary care physician office, that I said anyone who's heading into dialysis or needs a transplant, show them these tools, and they're happy. I've left like a folder and with copies with different doctors. I try to spread the information.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. So that is, or Kim, that is such a great idea. I
Mhm.
mean, the more we can spread it, and if doctors would refer patients, that would be great too, because then you get even people with transplant that aren't in there. I see some little hearts bubbling up there. A lot of people would love that suggestion. So, well, Andrea, Danielle, I think we're good to end the session, and thanks to our excellent presenters who have given us their time and their wonderful commitment with all of this. Is there anything else that Danielle or Andrea you want to say?
No, I just want to thank both Kim and Stephanie for those wonderful presentations, and also a big thanks to all the facilities for taking time out of your day to join our call.
Thank you.
There's a survey afterwards, so if everybody can hang
Yes.
out, it would be great. It will pop up when you go to leave the meeting. Thank you. Goodbye.